Hello friends, welcome back to our YouTube channel Doctor's Corner. In this today's lecture, we are going to discuss about the mechanics of respiration. Okay, it can be also stated as mechanics of breathing. Okay, so one and same, mechanics of respiration. So basically, what we are going to discuss under this today's topic is what are the muscles which are responsible for respiration. It is muscles for respiration, more specifically muscles responsible for inspiration and force expiration. Then we are going to discuss about the pressure and volume changes during the respiration. Okay, so under this side headings or with this objectives, we are going to discuss the today's topic of mechanics of respiration or mechanics of breathing, pressure and volume changes during respiration, that is inspiration and expiration. Okay, so now before going to the exact objectives or the side headings of this topic, mechanics of respiration also includes the various lung volumes and lung capacities, the lung compliance, work of breathing and airway resistance. These topics we are going to study in some other video. Right now in this particular video, because the length of the video may go means it will become too long, so we will take only these two side headings for the today's topic. So before going in detail about this topic, muscles of respiration, let's have a background about this respiratory process. Okay, and what are the structures involved in this respiration. Okay, we are just going to discuss about the lungs and the thoracic cage or the thoracic cavity or the chest wall. What does it consist of? Okay, so I'll just draw a rough line diagram of the lungs. I'll just draw one rough line diagram of one lung. Okay, right side lung, a rough line diagram. So now, as you know, this lung tissue is mainly made up of this air filled structures, that is a structural unit known as alveoli. Okay, air filled structures, the structural unit alveoli. Okay, now over this lung tissue there is a covering. That covering, it is known as pleura, and as you might be knowing, it consists of two layers. The outer layer, it is known as parietal pleura, and the inner layer, it is known as visceral pleura. Okay, visceral pleura, and the space in between these two layers, it is known as pleural cavity or the pleural space. Okay, now one more thing I want to add on here is the chest wall or the thoracic cage. So these two lungs, okay, I have drawn just one lung will be here for the sake of understanding, just I have drawn, and this is disproportionately large pleural space as compared to the volume of the lungs. Just for the sake of understanding, it is not a standard anatomical diagram. So this thoracic cage or the chest cavities mainly consist of, from posterior to anterior, the vertebral columns, and on either side the ribs along with this intercostal muscles and this sternum. Okay, so this one, the thoracic cavity, so this consists of mainly the ribs. Okay, with this black dots I am going to tell writing this as the ribs, various ribs roughly. Now in between these ribs there are intercostal muscles. Okay, there are intercostal muscles. With the help of this yellow color, I am just trying to show this muscles name as intercostal muscles, and more specifically I will just write here external intercostal muscles. Later we'll discuss about these things, intercostal muscles. And below these lungs there is very important muscle which will separate the thoracic cavity with the abdominal cavity, the very important muscle, that is the diaphragm. Okay, now with this background we are going to discuss the today's topic of mechanics of breathing. So the process of inspiration and expiration, how does this inspiration means inhalation of the gases inside the lungs, and expiration means exhaling the gases outside the lungs into the atmosphere. Okay, mainly we take in oxygen and take out carbon dioxide. You might have studied in the basic biology classes, right? Now how exactly this pressure and volume changes takes place in the lungs so that oxygen can accumulate inside and carbon dioxide should go outside, we are going to discuss now. One more thing I want to add on here is the normal respiratory rate. So this one cycle, that is inspiration and expiration, that constitute of one respiratory cycle. So in a minute it will be around 12 to 16 times. Okay, 12 to 16 times per minute, or it is as if like a heart rate is around 60 to 100 times per minute heartbeat. Similarly, that is the this one heart rate, and this is respiratory cycle will take around, this process of consist of one cycle is consist of inspiration and expiration. Okay, now this one here we are going to study the different pressures here. First we'll discuss three important pressures, and later we'll discuss about transmural pressures if time permits in this lecture or in some other video. So first one is the pressure which is inside this alveoli. Okay, the pressure, the air will be there in the alveolar tissues, okay, this alveolar sac. So the pressure exerted by that air, that is the pressure which is present inside the alveoli, that is called as intraalveolar pressure. Okay, intraalveolar pressure. It is simply also known as intrapulmonary pressure or just the pulmonary pressure. So both are same, intrapulmonary pressure. So what is this intraalveolar or intrapulmonary pressure? It is the pressure which is present in the alveoli. Okay, now we'll move on to the second pressure. You know, this two layers of this pleura, in between this there is a pleural space which is filled by a minimal amount of the fluid, that is known as pleural fluid, and there is some pressure which is present in this thing. Okay, mainly it is made up of liquid rather than this gaseous substance in the alveoli. So this also exerts some pressure, mainly it is negative. Why it is negative we are going to discuss now. So this pressure which is present in between this pleura, it is known as intrapleural pressure. Okay, it is known as intrapleural pressure in between the two layers of the pleura, that is the intrapleural pressure. Okay, now outside the atmosphere, okay, outside this is the third pressure. The outside there is atmospheric pressure, also known as barometric pressure, atmospheric pressure or barometric pressure. So how much is this normal atmospheric pressure? Now we'll just pen down the normal values of these various pressures. So I hope the concept is clear. What are these pressures? Intraalveolar pressure is the pressure which is present in the alveoli, or also known as intrapulmonary pressure, and the pressure which is present in this pleural cavity or the pleural space is known as intrapleural pressure, and outside is the atmospheric pressure, also known as barometric pressure. So at the sea level, generally this atmospheric pressure is around 760 millimeter of mercury. Okay, it is around 760 millimeter of mercury. Consider a condition, okay, when the lungs are at the resting condition. Resting condition means when neither it is taking in the phase of neither it is taking the gases inside or outside, that is neither inspiration process is there or the expiration process is there. Then if the nostrils and mouth are open, then the air will directly enter to the alveolar space. So the pressure is equal to the atmospheric pressure, that is around 760 millimeter of mercury. Okay, now for the sake of convenience, this 760 millimeter of mercury, we will take it as 0 millimeter of mercury. Okay, 760 means 0 millimeter of mercury. Okay, so intraalveolar pressure is also 0 millimeter of mercury. Now this intrapleural pressure, okay, it is normally it is negative, that is around minus 2.5 millimeter of mercury. When the intrapleural pressure, if we take it as 0 millimeter, then it is less than that, it is minus 2.5 millimeter of mercury. If it is suppose 760, then it could be around 758 or 756, so minus 2.5 to 4 millimeter of mercury. Okay, so generally the intrapleural pressure is negative. Okay, why it is negative? Intrapleural pressure, why it is negative is, so just try to understand this concept. Why is, you know, this lungs and the chest wall are the elastic structures. Lungs and the chest wall are elastic structures. If we consider individually as a lung, okay, what is mean by elastic structure? A structure which has an ability, that is to recoil to its original position, or a structure which can resist the deformation. That is, if suppose it is stretched, then after when the traction or the force which is causing that stress is removed, and it will try to come back to its original position. That is the nature of the elastic structure. So lungs is an elastic structure. Okay, so in our body naturally this is kept as a bit stretched. That means if we remove the lungs from the chest cavity and place outside, then the natural volume of the lungs will be smaller as compared to the size or the volume which is present inside our chest cavity or the thoracic cage. Okay, why these things happens is because the lungs are bit stretched. So lungs are bit stressed and kept it naturally in our body. Okay, so this will try to have a force. Always the tendency of the lungs will be to get it, that is the stretchability or the elasticity is to inside. That is the natural tendency of the lung is to collapse, or just not collapse, just to the forces will be towards the inside. That is, they will try to reduce the size towards inside, the force, because it is naturally stretched a little bit. Okay, so when it is stretched, then the tendency of the lung is, that is the elastic recoil of the lungs. Okay, so tendency will be always to recoil inside. On the other hand, if we consider the chest wall means again the same thing, rib cage, sternum, and the posteriorly the vertebrae. So this structure is again a elastic structure. So this also generally they will tend to recoil, that is elastic recoil outside. Okay, outside. That means normally if we remove the lungs outside and just see the chest wall as a separate entity, so it is again it is bit larger in size. Whereas if we see lungs as a separate entity from the chest wall, then lungs are originally of smaller volume, but together the lungs is bit stretched. But opposite is with the chest wall. If we consider chest wall as a separate entity, then this is usually it is bit this one expanded, but when it is present along with the lungs. Okay, so when the chest wall or the thoracic cavity inside this lungs are placed, then it is bit compressed. So it is bit compressed, so always the tendency of this chest wall is to go outside. So there are opposite forces, that is the elastic recoil of the lungs and the elastic recoil of the chest wall is in opposite direction normally inside our body. So how does it cause us the negative intrapleural pressure, that is elastic recoil of the lungs and the elastic recoil of the chest wall? So since both are in this opposite direction, and this visceral pleura is in close proximity with the lungs tissue, and this parietal pleura is in close proximity with this chest wall. Okay, so in between this there is a pleural fluid. So consider two glass slides. I think you might have used two glass slides for hematology practicals, like differential leukocyte count for forming a blood smear. Okay, now if you take two glass slides, just keep a drop of water and just wet it, and just touch that both the glass slide, that is the wet surface of that to each other, then what happens is they tend to stick each other. Okay, and if you want to separate them, it will not be separated very easily as compared to the dried slides. Why? Means that wet slide will cause us a fusion here, and when you try to remove it, there will be a negative pressure. So similar thing will be there in our lungs. So if consider this as the parietal pleura and this as the visceral pleura, now the lungs are the elastic recoil tendencies to go inside, whereas the thoracic cage is elastic tissue which will have a tendency to go outside, and both are usually remain together by this pleural cavity or the space by the thin fluid. Okay, and constantly they will be in that cavity. So whenever there is they are recoiling it, so this will cause us some section pressure or a negative pressure. So generally it is around minus 2.5 millimeter of mercury. Okay, so it is around minus 2.5 millimeter of mercury. Now with this background, when we know the different pressure, that is intraalveolar pressure, intrapulmonary pressure, and the atmospheric pressure and their normal value, we'll go to the muscles for inspiration. Before that, one more very important thing I want to mention here is regarding the tidal volume. What do you mean by tidal volume? Okay, its normal value is around 500 ml. So tidal volume means normal tidal respiration, that is during the quiet breathing, that is the quiet inspiration and quiet expiration. Generally what will happen is we take 500 ml of the air inside and 500 ml of the air outside, that is during expiration 500 ml goes and during inspiration 500 ml comes inside. Okay, so now this taking in and taking out of this 500 ml of the air is known as the tidal volume. Okay, now with with this background, now let's proceed to our main topic, muscles for respiration and pressure and volume changes during the respiration. Okay, so muscles for respiration, muscles involved. So we'll discuss muscles for inspiration separately and expiration separately, and during the quiet breathing and during the forced or labored breathing. Okay, so first we will see during the quiet or normal inspiration and during the quiet or normal expiration, what are the muscles involved. Okay, now remember, inspiration is an active process. Inspiration is an active process, whereas expiration is a passive process. So active process means it requires energy, that is the active contraction of the skeletal muscles here. So mainly two important muscles will actively contract during the quiet inspiration. So what are that muscles? One is the diaphragm muscle, another one is external intercostal muscle, diaphragm and external intercostal muscle. Okay, diaphragm and external intercostal muscle, these are the principal or the main muscles which are responsible for this process of inspiration. Okay, whereas during the quiet expiration, no muscles are involved. Okay, literally no muscles are involved, since it is a passive process and it is brought about by the relaxation of this muscle. So how exactly this diaphragm and intercostal muscle contraction causes the inspiration, let us discuss now. So I'll just once more I will draw a rough line diagram of the lung and the thoracic cage. Okay, so consider this as a lung which consists of the alveoli. Okay, which inside the pressure of the which is present in this alveoli is intraalveolar pressure. Okay, so consider this as a small lung tissue. Now over this there is, again I will draw a disproportionately large pleural cavity just for the sake of understanding. So visceral and parietal pleura with this red color marker. Then finally there is outside what is present, chest wall. Okay, chest wall along with the ribs. Okay, along with the various ribs, and in between these ribs there is very important muscle. Now more specifically with this yellow color, what I am drawing here is the intercostal muscles. Obviously the external intercostal muscle, there are two muscles or with three muscles, but we are going to discuss mainly now with relation to the inspiration is external intercostal muscle. Okay, external intercostal muscle, and below this lungs, which will one very important muscle which will separate the thoracic cavity with the abdominal cavity is the diaphragm. Okay, below this is the diaphragm. Now how exactly the process of inspiration takes place, how the signal goes, and which part of our body will control this process of inspiration. Before that I would like to ask one question, whether the respiration is a voluntary process or involuntary process? Yes, it is both. Okay, so respiration is usually involuntary process, but however it has some voluntary control. For example, voluntary breath holding during swimming or some other processes like meditation, and all sometimes voluntarily we can hold our breath, that is known as voluntary breath holding. So how exactly the signals of voluntary and involuntary goes to our brain, we'll discuss that in detail when we study under the regulation of respiration. Right now we'll just try to understand grossly, that is obviously the signal goes from the neurons, that is this brain. So I'll just draw a sagittal section. Okay, sagittal section means like this, sagittal section of the central nervous system, a rough line diagram. This is, consider this as the cerebrum or the brain, this is the anterior end, this is the posterior end, and the base of the brain consists of the brainstem. Brainstem mainly consists of midbrain, pons and medulla. Okay, midbrain, pons and medulla. Okay, and later it is continuous as spinal cord. Okay, it is continuous as spinal cord. Okay, so again on this posterior aspect of this pons and medulla there is one more structure known as cerebellum. Okay, now with this rough line diagram of central nervous system, that is brain and the spinal cord, how these respiratory muscles are connected and how this process of inspiration takes place, we are going to discuss now with the help of these two important muscles, diaphragm and the external intercostal muscles. So you know that the signal for involuntary respiration, generally we are not conscious about the inspiration process and the expiration process. Continuously the signal goes from the brainstem mainly, that is in the medulla. There are specialized group of neurons, okay, dorsal and ventral respiratory group of neurons. One is ventral respiratory group of neurons, okay. We'll discuss in detail about this various group. In pons also we have apneustic center, pneumotaxic center, we'll discuss later. So there is one ventral group of respiratory group of neurons which is continuously discharging the impulses in the form of action potential, and that neurons will go, that the message will go to the spinal cord. In the spinal cord segment, more specifically the C2, C3 and C4, C2, C3 and C4, okay, that segment, through that one nerve will arises from this spinal cord, and it will ultimately supply the diaphragm, and this nerve is the phrenic nerve, okay, phrenic nerve, C2, C3 and C4, okay, if I am not wrong. Then again in the spinal cord, from this thoracic segment T1 to T11, again from that nerves will originate and they will supply this external intercostal muscles, and this are known as intercostal nerves, okay, intercostal nerves, which originates from the thoracic segment from T1 to T11, okay. So roughly I am showing here how exactly the nerve supply of the diaphragm, the external intercostal muscles, okay. So this is the involuntary control through this ventral respiratory group of neurons in the medulla. They will continuously discharging the action potential, and that action potential whenever the impulses goes and reaches this diaphragm, and this through this intercostal nerve reaches this external intercostal muscles, they will contract and the act of inspiration starts, okay. Now I said you there is a voluntary control also. This voluntary control is mainly controlled by this cerebral cortex. Again from this cerebral cortex, a group of neurons will give information voluntarily either to this respiratory muscles, through this respiratory group of neurons, or directly to this C3, C4, C5 segment of the spinal cord, and also to this thoracic segment, okay. Now just I am telling a very gross things about this, detail we'll discuss in the regulation, okay. Right now remember this thing, it has both voluntary control as well as involuntary control of the central nervous system. Now after knowing the nerve supply to this particular muscles, what exactly will happen when the action potential reaches there and the diaphragm contracts and the external intercostal muscle, what exactly happens to the lung volumes first, then we'll see the lung pressures, what happens to the lung volumes and lung pressures, okay. Firstly, when the diaphragm, which is one of the principal inspiratory muscle, when it contracts, what will happen is it will descend down. So the thoracic cage cavity will, the volume of the thoracic cage cavity will increases in the vertical diameter, okay. So it will increase because of the contraction of the diaphragm as the diaphragm is pulled down towards the abdomen, okay. Now one thing is increase in the vertical diameter. Now what happened when this external intercostal muscle will contract? External intercostal muscles will contract. So you know this external intercostal muscles, usually they connect between the two ribs, okay. Imagine this is the second rib, this is the third rib, so they will connect these two ribs, okay, like this. So the origin is from this upper rib and the insertion is in the lower rib. So whenever it contracts, it will elevate the lower rib, okay. So it will elevate the lower rib. So basically whenever there is a contraction of this upper external intercostal muscles, like it's from second to sixth rib, okay. So what exactly will happen, and whenever there is a contraction of this external intercostal muscles from the 7th to 11th rib, what will happen, okay. So basically it is explained by two important movements. One is bucket handle movement of the rib cage movement, that is the bucket handle movement. Another one is pump handle movement, okay, pump handle movement and bucket handle movement. So what is this bucket handle movement and the pump handle movement? So let's consider this as a bucket, okay. I'm just again I will draw just a rough diagram of a bucket, okay. So rough diagram of the bucket. Now Generally there will be one handle here on the bucket. Consider this with the red color marker. What I am drawing is the handle of a bucket, okay, handle of a bucket. Now if you raise this handle of the bucket horizontally upward, so with this white blue color marker, what I am showing, this is the raised level, okay. So when you raise it, so what happens is the transverse diameter, if you consider this as the midline here, if you consider this as the midline, then the transverse diameter is increased, okay, transverse diameter increased. So we have bilateral representation of these ribs. So imagine a bucket which has two handles, okay, two handles like this, two handles like this. So whenever this lower rib intercostal muscle, that is from 7 to 11 ribs, contract, okay, external intercostal muscles contract, that is these ribs are elevated like this, and the transverse diameter is increased, okay, transverse diameter which was earlier this much, now it has increased this much. So the thoracic cage transverse diameter will increase. So what will happen is vertical diameter already increased due to the contraction of the diaphragm. Due to the lower 7 to 11 ribs, there is increase in the transverse diameter, okay, increase in the transverse diameter. Then what will happen if there is a contraction of this upper ribs, that is from 2nd to 7th ribs, okay. Now that is typically pump handle movement. I hope you have seen a hand pump borewell, okay, hand pump or the borewell. So hand pump or the borewell, there is one pump is there. So this pump usually you will do a manually hand pump, you will raise and put it down for the water, okay. I think you have seen a hand pump. So when you raise it up, the handle of the hand pump, so generally again here the diameter will increase, okay. So the diameter of this is increased when you raise it up, that from the resting condition to upside, then the diameter here will increase, okay. The diameter here will increase as compared to the resting condition, that is the hand pump. So to explain more specifically, the upper, consider this as the ribs. In between this there are intercostal muscles, and this one is attached to the posterior end, that is the vertebral column, okay. Now this remote control, consider this as a sternum bone, okay. So generally the rib cage will be like this, okay, just a gross idea. So this is the vertebral column attached, and both sides, these ones are the ribs, okay, upper ribs which are attached to the anteriorly to the sternum. So and this posterior end is at the upper level and the anterior end is at the lower level. So whenever this external intercostal muscles will contract, what it will do is it will raise the sternum like this, okay, raise the sternum like this, like a pump handle movements, okay. I'll show it laterally, you can see pump handle movements, okay, pump handle movements. So if you do like this, what will happen to the thoracic cage diameter, antero-posterior diameter will increase, okay. So all this diameter, antero-posterior diameter is also increased, antero-posterior diameter increased, transverse diameter increased, vertical diameter increased. So ultimately the chest wall, chest cavity is, the volume of the thoracic cage will increase. Now what happens if the volume increases? What happens to the pressures which are present in that thoracic cage? What will happen if the volume increases? Then there is a decrease in the pressure. So it is according to the Boyle's law. If you remember what is the Boyle's law, so under constant temperature, pressure is inversely proportional to the volume, right, in simple words, or you can say volume is inversely proportional to the pressure. So whenever there is increase in the volume of the thoracic cavity, the pressure inside that will decrease, okay. You can explain also this Boyle's law by one more diagram I can show. Consider one container containing this fluid, okay, containing this fluid. Now if that same container, if we compress the fluid with the help of one piston, okay, with the help of one piston, if we increases the pressure, okay, then what will happen? The volume will decrease. So if we increases the pressure, the volume from here decrease. You can see the molecules are separated, but here molecules are compactly arranged. So volume has decreased when the pressure is increased, okay. So they are inversely proportional. Now similar thing happens in this our thoracic cavity. When the volume is increased, the pressure will decrease. So what are the pressure that will decreases is, the pressure what is decreased here is the intraalveolar pressure, which is present in the lungs, and also the intrapleural pressure which is present in between this pleural cavity. So this intraalveolar pressure is decreased to -1 millimeter of mercury. So if at the resting condition it was 0, that is equivalent to 760 millimeter of mercury. So it is from, if we consider from 0 it will become -1, if we consider 760 it will become 759 millimeter during the inspiration. Okay, and intrapleural pressure from -2.5 millimeter or if we consider 760 with respect to sensitivity, that is 758 or 756, so it will go down to -6 millimeter during the process of inspiration. Okay, I'll just draw the graph of changes in the pressure and volume, then the concept will be more clear to you. So what are the changes that will take place is, first we'll draw a graph. So first we'll draw one straight line, one thicker straight line, okay, with thicker straight line which will separate the inspiration with the expiration. Okay, inspiration with the expiration, one thick straight line, okay, which will separate inspiration with the expiration. Okay, now this on one side there is a inspiration, one side there is inspiration, okay, of this blue line, inspiration process, and another side there is expiration process. Okay, now what is the duration of inspiration? It is around 2 seconds. What is the duration of expiration? Again 2 to 3 seconds, or just for the sake of understanding we'll take it as 2 seconds. Okay, now again we'll draw a graph here. We'll draw a time limits, that is the vertical lines here. Vertical lines here, we will just draw 2 vertical lines. Okay, here also we'll draw 2 vertical lines. Okay, and again we'll draw a few horizontal lines to complete the graph. So what we will first discuss is the on x-axis. On x-axis we'll discuss the time duration. Okay, consider this in second: 0 second, 1 second, 2 second, 3 second, 4 second. Okay, on x-axis these are the time duration. Okay, on y-axis we are going to discuss is the first thing is intraalveolar pressure, that is the intrapulmonary pressure. What happens to the intraalveolar pressure during the process of inspiration? Okay, graphically we are going to draw here now. So suppose it is 0 millimeter of mercury here. Okay, I'll draw with some other ink. 0 millimeter of mercury, this is +1 millimeter, this is -1 millimeter, this is -2 millimeter. Again further we'll draw few horizontal lines: -3, -4, -5, -6. Okay, so it is -3, -4, -5, -6. Okay, now on y-axis this is 0 millimeter of mercury, +1 millimeter of mercury, -1 to -6 millimeter. On x-axis time duration. Now first we are going to see the intraalveolar pressure changes. So at the resting condition, before the inspiration process starts, it is at 0 millimeter of mercury, that is intraalveolar pressure. So when this contraction of the muscles takes place, there is increase in the volume. This increase in the volume causes the decrease in the pressure. Okay, so decrease in the pressure, how much pressure is decreased? So it will come to the -1 millimeter of mercury that is in the mid expiration, and at the end expiration again it will come back to 0. Okay, so remember, PG entrance questions or NEET exams or next exam, they may ask what is the intraalveolar pressure at the end of the expiration. Again it is 0. Okay, now during the expiration it will become +1, and again at the end of expiration it will become to 0. Okay, so this is the graph for intraalveolar pressure. Okay, so it will become -1 during the peak of inspiration and +1 during the peak of expiration. Okay, so because of this intraalveolar pressure decrease, that is, if we come -1, there is a pressure gradient between the atmospheric pressure and the alveolar pressure, so air will enter inside the lungs. Also we'll discuss about the intrapleural pressure. Okay, intrapleural pressure, as you know, normally it was around 2.5 millimeter before the starting of the inspiration. So now this intrapleural pressure at the end of the expiration, it will reach to around -6 millimeter of mercury. Okay, it will reach to around -6 millimeter of mercury. Okay, So it will reach around -6 millimeter of mercury, and during the process of expiration again it will come back to -2.5 millimeter of mercury. Okay, now this is the changes in the intrapleurally. So there is a more negative pressure develops in the pleural space, also in the atmospheric pressure. So intrapleural pressure is reduced, intrapleural pressure and the intraalveolar or intrapulmonary pressure both are reduced. So because of the reduced pressure here, an external pressure, atmospheric pressure won't change. Okay, it is an extra. So because of that there is a pressure gradient, and this pressure gradient causes the air to enter the lungs, which causes the act of inspiration. So how the inspiration takes place? Because of this pressure gradient. This pressure gradient is occurred due to the volume changes. So what volume changes you expect in normal breathing is, so volume changes, what is expected here is during the normal breathing, what volume changes is expected here is, again we'll show it graphically. So again I'll draw a few lines here to show the volume changes here. So consider this as the zero volume, and on x-axis again the time duration, same for inspiration and expiration. So what exactly happen in the volume changes of this one is, so at during the process of inspiration there is the tidal volume, that is it is around 500 ml. Okay, 500 ml or 0.5 liters. Okay, 0.5 liters of the air enters inside the lung. So if it was consider it as a zero level, so from that zero level to 500 ml, however it's not zero, it will be around 2.5 liters residual volume and expiratory reserve volume is there. We'll discuss that in the lung volumes and capacities. Timing, just remember for the sake of understanding. So if we consider as the resting condition, that is functional residual capacity is there, from there 500 ml is increased, that is the normal tidal volume, and again during the expiration 500 ml is exhaled. So this is the normal tidal volume or the tidal respiration. Okay, so what is this volume changes? So volume changes is 500 ml of the gases enter inside and 500 ml will go outside in the during the process of expiration. And pressure changes is intraalveolar pressure is decreased to -1 millimeter and intrapleural pressure is decreased to -6 millimeter. This is in quiet inspiration, whereas in the deep breathing, if we try to take deep breathing like this, deep inspiration, then this intrapleural pressure will go up to -30 millimeter of mercury. Okay, -30 millimeter of mercury, and even this intraalveolar pressure is further reduced. It may go to -2, -3, so that more amount of the air can enter inside this. So we are discussing the muscles of the respiration. So we have already discussed that the main muscles for the respiration is diaphragm and intercostal muscles in quiet breathing, but when we take the deep inspiration or the labored breathing as in exercise and all, so the other muscles that is helpful is serratus anterior or this one pectoralis minor muscle, then scalene muscles. These are the accessory muscles, and the most important is sternocleidomastoid muscles. Okay, sternocleidomastoid muscle, contraction of this elevates the rib cage. Okay, cleidomastoid muscles during the forced breathing. So what are the muscles? Our first topic, what are the muscles for respiration? During the muscles for inspiration first. So muscles for inspiration is diaphragm. So diaphragm and external intercostal muscle. And what are the muscles for extra other muscles is pectoralis minor, sternocleidomastoid muscles and the scalene muscles. Okay, these are the muscles for the deep or labored breathing. Now this is about inspiration. Now what about expiration? So expiration is a passive process. Simply there will be no muscle contraction takes place, and it will occur because of the relaxation of this diaphragm and external intercostal muscles. Now how does the signal reaches this muscle to relax? So after the end of the expiration, you know, there are certain stretch receptors which are present in the chest wall, also in the lungs. So whenever they are expanded, when the lungs cavity is expanded and also this one thoracic cage or the chest wall are expanded, these stretch receptors which acts as a sensors are stimulated, and they will send the signal to this respiratory neurons in the medulla, it is ventral respiratory group of neurons, to inhibit it. So when it is inhibited, then the action potential which is sending continuously is stopped, and because of this stopping of this nerve impulse, the muscles will relax, and due to the just relaxation of this, expiration is a passive process and the volumes will come to the opposite direction and the expiration, normal expiration takes place. However, during the forced expiration or the labored expiration, that is above the normal tidal volume of 500 ml, if we want to exhale more, then how does this will help? So suppose if I want to exhale more exhale, okay, so some extra muscles will take place. So the muscles which are responsible for the forced expiration are quiet breathing, no muscles, remember. One is abdominal muscles. Abdominal muscles, mainly the transverse abdominis muscles, rectus abdominis muscles, internal and external oblique muscles, okay, that will help in the forceful expiration. Also, one more very important muscle is internal intercostal muscle. Internal intercostal muscle, okay, internal intercostal muscle. So remember here one basic rule for the muscles for inspiration. So see, the first alphabet of inspiration starts with I, right, and the first alphabet of expiration starts with E, okay, starts with E. So but the muscles, mainly the intercostal muscles, for inspiration, which muscle is helpful? External intercostal muscles. Whereas for expiration as such, no muscle, but in forceful expiration, internal intercostal muscle, that is opposite. Just for the sake of remembering, just remember like this: I, E, okay, opposite muscles, E, I, that is expiration, internal intercostal muscles, okay. So I hope I have done with the today's topic, that is the mechanics of breathing, which we have discussed under the muscles of respiration and the pressure and volume changes. Just to summarize the today's topic, what we have discussed is, first we had a background about the various pressures: intraalveolar pressure, intrapleural pressure and the atmospheric pressure. Then why the intrapleural pressure is negative, mainly because of the elastic recoils of the lungs and the chest walls in the opposite direction. Then finally what we have discussed is about the mechanics of breathing, how the pressure changes takes place inside the lungs, with the help of the bucket handle movement and the pump handle movement, okay. And finally the volume changes, that is the tidal volume, that we have discussed this one. So we have discussed the muscles of inspiration and muscles of expiration, and finally the pressure and volume changes during the respiration. So in the next video we are going to discuss about the lung volumes and capacity. Also we are going to discuss about the lung compliance, work of breathing, airway resistance. So if you like our video, please subscribe and share the link with your friends. Thank you very much.